Welcome to the Wild Hope Rising podcast. We're your hosts, Sunny Kane and Tammy Clotton, and we're so glad you stopped by. We want to help you be wildly you, and believe it or not, you're already her. We invite you to gather around the table with us. We'll help you move through your wilderness season, no matter how you got here. So lean in, let's ignite your purpose and discover what you're made of. Buckle up, my friend. It's time for Wild Hope. Well, welcome back to the podcast, ladies. We're so glad to have you on Wild Hope Rising. I've always wanted to do that. Okay, girls. The truth is, whenever we're getting ready to start, I'm always behind the scenes saying to Tammy, like, how do I start? How do we launch into this? What do I say? And so I just decided for you to get to have a moment to come inside of my head. I'm going to start using a new voice every time. What do you think? I think it's our new flow, Tammy.
Give it a try. Let's see how it goes. Ladies, let us know what you think.
Half the time when we're getting ready to start, girls, I give Tammy an idea of how we can start, and you should see her face. She is so kind with a smile on her face that also says, Sunny, you got to check yourself before you wreck yourself, girl. But we do. We want to welcome you to Wild Hope Rising and just remind you that you know what we're doing here. We are creating a cute community of women. Goodness, it's going to be a great episode, girls.
Wow.
Hold on to your seatbelts. But listen, we're building here a community of women. And these are women who are real about what is happening in their lives because we all walk through seasons that are difficult, seasons that are crazy, but also seasons of joy. And in the midst of them all, we are all longing for hope. It's like written in our hearts. And I'm so excited about what we're building here, Tammy, about the women who have said, hey, I'm here. I'm sitting at the table. Hasn't it just been so amazing?
It has been such a joy even to get to interact with some of them. And I hope for more of that as well. But just, man, building a table where they can come and join us is exciting. Just love it.
And recently you opened up our email for this thing that it tells us all of our stats on the podcast, which I don't love looking at because sometimes we can get into comparison mode. But ultimately, tell us what the stats said, Tammy.
They said, dun, dun, dun,
Dun, dun, dun, dun.
1,000 downloads.
And counting.
And counting, yes. So super stoked about that.
I mean, 1,000 people. So then we got all like, what does 1,000 downloads mean? And, you know, when what were you thinking when you got that email?
Well, first I was like, they've downloaded. Are they actually listening? So, honestly,
girls, are you here? Is anybody there?
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, right.
Don't worry. This isn't a plug for Verizon. So don't worry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. But just excitement that you guys are listening and that it has value. And hopefully you're sharing with your friends and all of that too. Because that's why we're doing this. Yeah. We're not doing it to hear our own voices.
Yeah. And thank you so much. For those of you who've been listening for a while, thank you for trusting us with a part of your day. Thank you for helping us build this community. We would love to see in the future where we actually get to see face to face who you are. And we'd love to hear your stories. So feel free to use our show notes to find out how you can get in touch with us. We also really appreciate your rate, your review. And honestly, I'd listened to podcasts before. I had never rated and reviewed. I didn't understand how important that is in order to get your message out there. So friends, don't just rate and review us. If you are eating at somebody else's table, we also want you, any of those podcasts, go rate and review them. Let's be a culture of honor from Wild Hope Rising. We honor people. We thank them for the work that they're doing. And one week we can do that is through the rate and review that helps them spread the message.
Yes. So good.
Right.
So true.
So girls, you're sitting at a table today with 1,000 people. And so it is a big table, and we are very excited about this big table. And the great news is we always got room. This table will always be growing. And whether you think every thought that we think, it don't matter. We want you to come with your thoughts. We want you to come with who you are because we're on common ground. And while we have different beliefs, we walk through the same kind of issues. But I was telling Tammy before we got started that when I imagined us growing this table to 1,000 and beyond, I thought of that old Audio Adrenaline song that was like, at the big, big house with lots and lots of rooms. This is my line. With the big, big table and all the pretty shoes.
Well done. Well done. You won't catch
Well
me
done.
doing that.
But if you don't want to wear shoes here, you don't have to. With that, girls, have you ever heard this statement, this phrase, your story matters? Your story, it matters. Tammy, when you hear that, what do you think goes through people's minds?
Oh man, I thought of a couple of things when we were talking about it earlier, Sunny, and one of them was really because nobody listens when I try to talk and tell my story. And so that's a legit thing, right? In our society where we're kind of rushing past things.
And
And then the
it's
other,
so funny because earlier, Tammy was like noticing my face when I said your story matters. Because for me, when I hear your story matters, it is so a played out statement for me. Like on some levels, it's lost its power. And I know we're gonna talk about that today. So if you're a person who's like, are they going into the your story matters and you feel the same kind of tension I feel
yeah.
with that, stick with us. But Tammy, what else comes to people's minds when they hear that your story matters?
Another thing that you might think is if they knew my story, then they would reject me. They would not want to be around me. I've heard that so many times. And so I've made it a mission that to say your story actually does matter to me. Um, and then another one is I don't want to brag about myself. You know, people don't want to hear all about what I have been doing and all of that kind of thing. So, yeah, another one, like you were saying, man, it is just so overused. And then the other one is, but my story isn't as bad as someone else's story. And so why bother even
So
sharing
we
it?
just invalidate. We
Yeah.
invalidate the story
Yep.
rather than ever sharing it because we've heard somebody else's really big, hard story.
Yep.
And I think that there's a part of us that wants to believe that our story matters. But there's a tension there. And I'm curious, just real quickly, how do you think we usually treat our stories? When you think of the story of our life, the story of our past, how do we treat those?
Uh, so a lot of times it's like, let's just move on, right? So we want to deny it sometimes. We want to run from it. We want to minimize it. It's not as bad as somebody else's. So no worries, just moving on. Um, but sometimes we also engage it with curiosity.
Yeah,
I
I
know
think
I
it
do
took
sometimes. Yeah.
And I think it took me I think I've done over the years, I've engaged it with curiosity and had a relationship with every single one of the ways you just described what we do as people and how I've treated my story. I have found myself saying, "Can I just get a new freaking chapter?" I mean, excuse my language there, but can I get a new chapter? And in more recent seasons, because I've done so much work on my story, I have been like, I just wish I had a whole entire different book. I don't like my story, God.
Oh, gosh, I have been in that season before, and I just remember one time I was just like, God, if I knew what my story was going to be, I would have opted out. I didn't want to do this. And what I heard in response, like as clear as day, was Jesus say, I knew what my story was going to be, and I opted in for you. Oh,
He knew what his story was going to be, and he opted in for you. Friend, wherever you are right now, even if you got to hit pause, I want you to let that just kind of reverberate in your heart. He opted in for you. I immediately am thinking of the scripture. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, and you were the joy that was before him. Let's just sit with that for a minute and hit the pause button. Nice elevator music.
Mm.
Thanks for opting in for us, Jesus. And with that, I recently, not too long ago, I had an opportunity to interview Adam Young, and he's somebody I've looked up to for many years. He's helped me through seasons in my story without even knowing. It's not like he was my friend or anything. I've listened to his podcast, and it's really helped me in my life. And I had the opportunity to actually interview him on his book, Make Sense of Your Story. And it is right what we're talking about today. He really helps unpack the truth that all of us carry a story. But not all of us really know how to name it, let alone face it with kindness, with curiosity, with hope. And yet the truth is, our stories are shaping everything, our relationships, how we see God, and how we show up in this world.
Man, and when I was listening to this podcast, I had my own experience with how I had kind of minimized some disappointment in my life and didn't want to look at that. And so then after I was done having my own experience, I was like, Sonny, we have got to have Adam speak to our ladies. They need to hear this. And so what did you do after that?
Well, and it was so funny because I debated. I was like, well, I'll just reach out to him again and see if I could have him on the podcast. But then I thought, I wanted to honor his time. I already got the opportunity to sit with him. So I reached out to my boss. So I am on staff at Pilgrim Radio, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's been so much fun because I'm helping them to build a bridge from their current audience. They've been so faithful at serving and into a younger generation. And anyways, I went to my boss and I just said, hey, is there any chance that I could share this with the Wild Hope ladies that I sit at this table with? And you guys, he said yes. And so I am so geeked out about this. And I know Tammy is too, because like you
I
said,
know.
you had your
Yes.
own
Yeah.
experience with this. But Adam graciously agreed to allow us to use it here too. So we want to thank Adam. We want to thank Pilgrim Radio because this did originally air there. And if you are not familiar with Adam Young, he is a trauma therapist, a theologian, and the voice behind the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. And his new book, Make Sense of Your Story, and I'm going to link it in the show notes because I want to encourage you to actually pick this book up. But it's a gentle guide toward healing, connection with God, and discovering who you really are. This conversation might just be the invitation that your soul has been waiting for. So ladies, buckle up. It's time for Adam Young. Adam, I want to welcome you to the Wild Hope Rising podcast.
Thank you, Sonny. It's good to be with you.
So I know this work is personal to you. Can you take us back to a moment in your own story where God invited you to start doing your own healing work and what drew you into this path?
Sure. I was 35-ish years old and had experienced up until that point a lot of depression, anxiety, just symptoms, difficulty with emotions, difficulty with relationships. And somebody gave me a copy of The Wounded Heart, which is a book by Dan Allender. And that book introduced me to the idea that I had a story from my growing up years. And really, better said, I had stories, experiences, incidents, scenes, vignettes from my growing up years in my family of origin. And that those stories were playing out and very much affecting my present life as a 35-year-old. And so the book, The Wounded Heart, was really my introduction to the idea that I had a story and that story matters for my present life.
And so you entered into that journey with Dan Allender. And
Yes.
then as that kind of progressed, it brought you to a place where you've ended up writing Make Sense of Your Story. And
Right.
your book centers around this idea. You actually say that understanding our story is the single most important thing we can do to experience healing. Why is that? Why does story matter so much to our spiritual and emotional lives?
Because we have neurons. That's just what it means to be created in the image of a triune God. Not only do we have neurons in our brain, but we are fundamentally social, relational beings, created in the image of a we and not an I. Relationships influence the neural connections in our brains more than anything else. Therefore, you have to understand something about your earliest relationships with your primary caretakers. Whatever your family constellation looked like, mom, dad, stepmom, stepdad, whatever it looked like for you, those first 18 years of your life profoundly influence the way the neurons in your brain are currently connected. So if you want to understand your present experience of reality, you have to understand something about your stories.
Now, I know that you have a background in both trauma therapy and theology, and this may be redundant here, but how do these help inform and shape the content of your book?
Well, the entire book, Make Sense of Your Story, is really the intersection of trauma and what we know about trauma and how God meets us in the midst of those stories of heartache, harm, abuse. And so, what I tried to do in the book is give readers like an introduction, an invitation, and a guide into exploring their own family of origin stories, their own sexual story, their own collective story, the story that their body is communicating to them. There's a chapter on all of those topics. But each of those topics is one aspect of what it means to be created in the image of God. And so your body is part of the image bearing. Your sexuality is part of what it means to be an image bearer. And certainly your family of origin is a necessary context to understand how your heart has been shaped over time.
And I can imagine even those areas that you just mentioned, how there's a level of resistance
Yeah.
to each one of them. I mean, I'd love to hear you say more about in your body what we're
Mhm.
experiencing. Could you dive deeper into that?
Sure. I mean, Christians especially have got in the West, we have to come to terms with the fact that we are embodied and that that's not a bad thing. It's a glorious image bearing kind of thing. Many Christians have the idea that the body is secondary to the soul. The idea is that your body is just a vehicle for the part of you that really matters, which is your soul. And nothing could be further from the biblical truth. The Bible takes the body very seriously. And your body, when I say your body, what do I mean? I mean the sensations in your gut. I mean the lump in your throat. I mean the dysregulation in your body as you're living your day and somebody says something to you with a particular tone of voice or a particular facial expression, and your felt experience on the inside changes. That's called dysregulation. And all it means is that you know what it's like in your body when you're having a difficult interaction with somebody. Your physiology changes. Well, there's a reason for that, and that reason is rooted in your story. So not everything in present day-to-day life dysregulates all people equally. It's different for different people, and the question is why? Well, because different people have different stories.
And in that, I'm thinking of just my own story. I always feel that dysregulation that you're talking about, that shows up just kind of in my chest. It's not quite
Yeah.
the lump, it's in my chest, and it's this tension that exists. And so you're inviting us to what? We get that feeling that, everybody carries it differently. We start to notice that. What is it that you're inviting us into with that?
Well, you said the first magic word, notice it. That's the first step. For many, many folks, they are unaware of their moment to moment bodily experience, the internal sensations. They don't know. I didn't know as a 35-year-old when I was dysregulated. I didn't know that I was dysregulated because I wasn't paying attention to my bodily experience. So noticing it is the first step. Then the second step is the word curiosity. Will you be curious about, okay, why is my chest tightening right now? Or why did I get butterflies in my stomach yesterday when I had that difficult interaction with my son or daughter? Why did I get a lump in my throat when I had that difficult interaction with my partner? There's a reason. And if you bring curiosity to your bodily sensations, you will find that those bodily sensations will speak to you. They will answer the questions that you bring with curiosity, and they will say things like, I feel 5 years old rather than 50 years old. Okay, well, that's really helpful bodily based data. And then the question becomes, what happened when you were 5? And that can lead you down a path of exploring your name. And by name, I mean the essence of what makes you you. If you want to understand who you were created to be, you have to know something about your stories when you were a kid.
Yeah, I love in your book, you say you cannot know yourself until you've named the deepest longings of your heart and the most devastating disappointments. Can you unpack that for us? And how does identifying desire and disappointment help us to discover who we truly are?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad you read that sentence. That's such an important sentence. Each one of us is a storehouse of longings, desires, wants. Now, for many people, they might be disconnected from their desires, from their wants, and they might not know what they are. But there's a reason for that. There's a story behind that. However, think of a 5-year-old. They draw a picture. They want you to put it on the fridge. What is their desire? They are desiring the delight of their mother and father.
Mm.
They want to feel delighted in. They want to feel your eyes beam and glow when they enter the room or when they hand you something that they designed. Well, every one of us was once 5 years old, and we had the desire for delight, especially delight from our primary caretakers. And then as you grow, your desires change and evolve, and they give you a clue into who you really are. The other part of life that gives you a clue about who you are your disappointments. And all of us carry within us a big vat of unmet longings, which we call disappointments. For many people, their disappointments, instead of leading them to engage with God or provoking them to engage with God about their life, their disappointments are the prompt for them to withdraw from God and to pull away from other relationships. And when that happens, it is very difficult to get a handle and to really understand the goodness of the desire behind the disappointment. And so I am a really big fan of writing down and knowing what you want and what has absolutely broken your heart. If you can write one or two of those stories, stories of desires met or stories of desires unmet, you're going to learn a lot about who you really are and what you were put on earth to do.
As you're talking, I'm immediately thinking of just even in my own story, how the idea of writing down my desires or writing down what I want most, first of all, feels scary. But there's this other little voice inside that I think a lot of people wrestle with that say, why? Why should it be about what I want? Shouldn't it be about what God wants? Like, what would you say
Right.
to that person?
What I would say to that person is you have to take the image of God a little bit more seriously inside of you. None of us are identical. All of us are unique. We are not supposed to become little miniature versions of Jesus. I am supposed to become a sanctified Adam. But I can't be Adam if I don't know what makes me a unique reflection of the glory of God. My heart, which reflects God in a different way than your heart, it needs to be understood by me before I can step into my calling. I can't even know what my calling is apart from my past story, which will tell me something about the longings of my heart. So there's nothing self-absorbed or self-indulgent or self-centered about looking back at the past when you are doing it for the purpose of apprehending your calling and stepping into your calling more deeply.
Oh, I love that, the apprehending your calling, because how many of us get, you'll hear people today say, I don't know what my calling is. And, and that can be paralyzing, especially when we're comparing ourselves to other people who seem to have their calling intact and they're chasing after it.
Yeah.
But I love the way that you're framing that with a new invitation of if we were to have a little bit more discovery in our stories, discovering of those desires, we might actually find calling in a new way.
Absolutely. I think it's inevitable.
I love that. So you explained that our past continues to shape us, often outside of our awareness. Can you talk a bit about what's happening in the brain and how unprocessed experiences can keep us stuck, even spiritually?
Sure. I mean, for me, for example, I grew up in a home in which my father was emotionally distant and checked out, and my mother was consumptive. In other words, she looked to me as her surrogate spouse. She looked to me for companionship, for camaraderie. She looked to me to be an adult when I was only a child. And that's very damaging on the brain. And it profoundly influenced how I began to relate to God. So on the one hand, I felt like God was distant and uninterested in me because of my relationship with my dad. That's what that taught me. And on the other hand, I felt like God was inconsistent. That was the nature of my relationship with my mom. And so the attachment term for this is ambivalent attachment. I am ambivalently attached. When that plays out in my relationship with God, the fruit of it, and I'm not using that term positively, the byproduct of it, the fruit of it is I am obsessed, and this is less true now than it was 10 years ago, obsessed about how is my relationship with God right now? Do I feel connected to God in this moment? Is God there for me? Can I count on God? And so ambivalently attached folks that had relationships with their mom like I did are going to be constantly uncertain about the presence and activity of God in their day-to-day life. And that's not because you have theology wrong. It's because you have neurons that have been shaped by your earlier relationships with your primary caretakers.
And so that's just these cycles that are repeating themselves. You enter into those thoughts in the attachment of, where is God? He is not near. You're wondering. And then are you saying that those neurons trigger different responses in how we constantly continue to respond?
What I'm saying is that neurons filter all of our present day-to-day experiences. So you don't see, none of us see and experience reality as it actually is. You see and experience reality through the filter of the neural networks in your brain, which means that somebody who has, for example, been physically abused, that person's brain is going to be scanning the horizon, the relational horizon, for danger all the time. And someone who has not been physically abused, their neural networks are very different. And therefore, they are not constantly hypervigilant, looking for danger, looking for violence. So you've got two different people, two different brains, and two different stories. That's what I really want people to understand, is that it is important, if you want to understand your present experience of reality, it is very important to understand how your neural networks have been shaped, which means it's important to understand your stories.
Yeah. Now, what would you say to a listener who says, sure, I have a story. I mean, I've experienced some hard things, but it wasn't nearly as traumatic as what other people have walked through?
Super common. And here's what I would say. Are you aware that you are minimizing your story simply because you know of someone who, quote unquote, had it worse than you? The second thing I would say is, if your friend has two broken legs, it doesn't make your broken arm hurt any less. So why are you ignoring or minimizing or dismissing your pain simply because someone else has it worse than you? And the answer to that oftentimes comes back to the words are in Jeremiah 6, they're repeated in Jeremiah 8, where God says, you dress the wounds of my people as though they are not serious. Peace, peace, you say, when there is no peace. Now, that was spoken to the leadership of Israel, but sadly, many of us do that with our own wounds. We dress them as though they're not serious. And the listener in your example, the hypothetical listener who's saying, somebody else had it worse than me, therefore I'm not going to address my own wounds, they're doing exactly what Israel is doing in Jeremiah 6 and 8. They're saying, peace, peace, everything's fine. That was 30 years ago. It's in the past. It doesn't affect me anymore. And God wants to take your wounds seriously. He wants you to take your wounds seriously so that God can meet you in the midst of that pain.
And what about the listener on the other side of that who almost has a hesitancy to lean in to story work because they feel like, listen, I'm aware of my stories. In fact, I feel like I paid more than suffering's dues.
Yes.
And so feels like in their future, they don't want to have to keep dealing with these stories of harm because there was one too many.
Yes. And I absolutely understand that felt bodily experience of, if I go there, Adam, if I start crying, I'll never stop. If I look back at the past, it will pull me under and I will be in the fetal position on a rug in my bedroom and not be able to get up. And I need to be a wife, or I need to be a coworker, or I need to be an adult. I have responsibilities. And if I look at the past, it's going to unravel me. I am very empathetic to that feeling. I've had it myself. The dilemma is the past isn't dead. In the words of William Faulkner, the novelist, it's not even past. And so you are currently reenacting harm from your past. You're bound in biblical language, bondage, idolatry. You're bound until you are able to feel those unfelt feelings from your growing up years that come across as overwhelming. And so I get the overwhelm, but I believe that you have to go there if you want freedom in the present and in the future. And if you really want to know who you are.
And this is where you talk about biblical lament.
Yes.
And I would love to hear you talk about what is the purpose of biblical lament and why do we tend to resist it?
I think not all cultures resist it. White evangelical types resist it because of our culture. We've been taught that, there's no value in dwelling on the past or crying over spilled milk. I mean, the amount of contempt that many of us have for grief is staggering. However, there are lots of cultures, and certainly the culture at the time of Christ, that they did not have the same posture towards tears that we do. And so the question is, what is keeping you from grieving your losses? What is keeping you from, in the language of lament, bringing to speak anger and sorrow bringing it to God the way the psalmists do, because the psalmists do it a lot. The entire book of Lamentations, you can see it in the title, is a heartfelt expression of sorrow and anger at the God of Israel. Why are we so reluctant to go there when the scriptures give us the words to go there all the time? The book of Jeremiah, the book of Job, so many of the Psalms are daring us. They're practically daring us to pray these words to God. Why? Because when you lament, when you bring your heartfelt sorrow and grief and anger to God, you will find that God responds. Maybe not immediately, but in time. And in that response, you are addressed as an individual and as a broader community, and there is something new that comes out of that experience of lament. And until you are able to bring your sorrow to speak, you will remain stuck. So if you want newness, you've got to risk the courage and the honesty of frank, candid speech to God.
It's interesting because I've done a lot of story work over the years, and sorrow felt easier to enter into because it felt natural. Of course, I would be sad over all that I walk through. But anger, oh boy, that one, I think it kept me stuck for a very long time. And I think that it, as you say in your book, it feels very risky to people. So what does it look like for us to summon the courage to enter into the feeling of anger?
It's really about integrity and honesty. We all feel anger at others and at God. It's not that we don't feel it. We feel it and then we squelch it in the name of a real Christian doesn't express anger at God. In the name of do not let the sun go down on your anger. We have so many ways of silencing the natural anger that bubbles up from inside of us. The alternative is to welcome that anger and to bring it honestly and candidly to God in prayer, in speech, in communication. And that is a holy, holy endeavor that we have modeled for us so many times, not just in the Psalms, but in the life of Jesus. There's plenty of place in the life of Paul. Look, Paul expressed his anger at the churches with frequency. So if the people in the scriptures who tell us to imitate them have the experience of anger, why are we unwilling to go there ourselves? It's oftentimes a combination of a lack of courage, a lack of honesty, or the fear that God is going to smite me if I say those words to God.
Yeah, or for me, it was the fear of if I get angry, what will that say of who I am? Like, I won't be trusting God if I'm angry at him.
Yes. And that's such a common feeling. But here's the thing, God knows that you are angry. God knows that way before you bring it to speech. So why not risk honoring God with who you really are and what you're really feeling? It's about honor, just like talking to another person about our anger with them. That's a form of honoring the relationship.
Yeah. I love this quote from your book. You say, more often than not, your anger at God is a result of how important God is to you. Say more.
Well, I just think that's true. It's certainly been true in my own life. If you didn't care about your relationship with God, if you didn't have a sense of Heavenly Father, then you wouldn't be angry about your perception of his abandonment of you, or his not coming through for you in whatever way, or the thematic trail of disappointment that you carry in a particular area. If the relationship didn't matter to you, you wouldn't feel anger. We feel anger at people because they matter to us.
Oh, that's such a great perspective. Now, I want to get into I keep thinking of this section as leading into possibilities because I know story work can feel very heavy. And for a listener out there who has been avoiding this work for a long time, I want to have a little bit of hope here. You actually
Mhm.
talk about us co authoring our stories with God. Would you speak to that? Like, what does it really mean to co author with Him?
Well, God takes human freedom and responsibility very seriously. I mean, that's the opening chapters of Genesis. It's very clear that God created, and that one of the aspects of his creation is human beings, and human beings have a lot of agency. They have a lot of freedom. And at the same time, there is this thing called the sovereignty of God. And so Genesis, the story of Joseph is the best example. The end of Genesis holds together human freedom. The brothers throw him into a pit, and divine sovereignty. At the end, Joseph says, what you intended for harm, God intended for good. And so the book of Genesis, and indeed the whole Bible, holds together the reality of human freedom and the reality of divine sovereignty. And so what I use to describe that is the verb co-author. I don't know a better verb. You are writing the next chapter of your life right now. And the plea of this book, Make Sense of Your Story, is, will you look at the past so that you can write a different future?
Mm.
Will you look at your stories that have so profoundly shaped the development of the neurons in your brain so that you can live into a different future in the years to come? Because until you look at the past, you're going to simply be caught up in repetitions and reenactments, because that's how neurons operate.
So, how does somebody get started in this work? What does it look like for them to go back and enter their story?
Yeah. Well, there's lots of exercises in my book that takes people into that. But here's one for your listeners to start with. Ponder, call to mind, welcome one of your stories from your growing up years. And by story, I mean one of your memories. And you don't have to remember all of it. None of us do. But the fragment, the piece, the anecdote that you still remember, and you may not be sure why you remember it, but it has something of haunting inside of you. What would it look like to write 700 to 1,000 words story of that event, that experience, that moment? It might be 30 seconds of your life, but you remember it, and can you write it out like a novelist? And then will you read it to someone who has a caring disposition towards you and someone who has some ability to hold your story with care and curiosity? And then if you'll read it, will you let yourself be moved by their reaction to it?
You said something there. You said to bring it to somebody who can hold your story with care and curiosity. What does that look like if we're the ones holding someone's story? Like, how can we show that care and curiosity?
Oh, the first step is, will you let your own body be affected by the story of the 8-year-old in 3rd grade who has just been shamed and humiliated in her classroom, runs home and tells mom, and mom is utterly uninterested in what happened to that 8-year-old? If I can let my body be affected, in other words, remember what it was like to be 8, feel the humiliation, feel what that storyteller feels as they are narrating, or maybe doesn't feel because they're disconnected from it. But if I can feel in my own body something of what the 8-year-old went through, well, then the gift that I'm going to give the storyteller is, here's what's happening for me as you tell that story. What's it like to hear how your story as an 8-year-old girl is affecting me right now? And that is a very kind and provocative invitation for someone. Because for most of us, no one has borne witness to the core stories of our lives, and we have minimized them, and therefore we have not experienced connection interpersonally with someone else who cares about the boy or girl in the story.
Mm. For some reason, when you were just talking, what came to mind, I heard it in a brand new way, is that scripture in Revelation that says, through the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony,
Mhm.
the enemy is defeated.
Mhm.
Wow. I mean, when someone holds your story,
Yes.
it's not just so we bear witness to the world, it's so someone bears witness on our account as well.
Yes, absolutely. And each of us needs our stories to be witnessed by other people.
And that's hard, especially when trust has been broken for a lot of people, to go
Absolutely.
admit the harm. Or maybe we've spent a lot of our lives building a reputation that we're the strong one. Well, that came from those places we felt weak. And now you're inviting us to go in and mingle with our weakness again, Adam.
Yeah, that's perfectly said, Sonny. That is perfectly said. That I experience that from people all the time. They are being invited. I am inviting them to grapple with the places of shame, the places of felt weakness, the places of powerlessness in their stories, which are still very much at play in how they bodily experience day-to-day life now.
And you encourage us to do this whole process with kindness. Your subtitle is actually Why Engaging Your Past with Kindness Changes Everything. I'd love you to speak to self-contempt, how it blocks the healing journey, as well as why kindness is so crucial.
Sure. In my experience, more than anything else, self-contempt, by which I mean a posture from Adam towards Adam that is cruel, dismissive, harsh, that blocks the natural healing process more than any other single factor. If, when I think back to 10-year-old Adam, 13-year-old Adam, if my posture towards that boy is contemptuous, in other words, he was so weak, he was such a fool for trusting that person, he was being humiliated in middle school, and he never stood up for himself. Those are all accusations toward the boy. The invitation is, what would it look like to bring kindness, curiosity, and welcome to that 13-year-old boy and let him speak when you are feeling kindness for him? When that shift happens from self-contempt to kindness, then all manner of healing breaks loose. It's just what needs to happen. The human brain, the heart, cannot heal in a posture of accusation and self-contempt. There has to be kindness. And the biblical place that I always go to is Romans 2:4, where Paul writes, it's the kindness of God that leads us to repentance. Okay, well, if that's true, then why are you so contemptuous towards earlier versions of you?
Mm. I want to keep talking on this so much, but before we end up ending our time, I really want you to talk about this war of hope that you
Mhm.
discuss in your book. It really struck me. You said, "Who around us does not know something of the restless torment that comes from the war between the part of us that believes God actually cares about our longings and the part that looks around and sees all the evidence that God is not coming through for us?" Can you speak to the listener who knows this ache?
Yes, you're not alone. And I don't just mean you're not alone, i.e. Adam can relate to you. I mean you're not alone, the Bible stories can relate to you. The very foundation of Israel, of the story of Israel, is a war with hope and hopelessness. Abraham and Sarah were barren. So God gave them this audacious promise, and they remained barren for years. What do you think that was like inside their heart as they felt the hope of God has promised us a child, but the promise has delayed? And I don't think there's a person on the planet that can't relate to that anxiety of there's something I want. I know it's good. I believe God wants this gift for me. And yet the data of my life is nothing is happening in that area. And so we begin to have a war with hope. And for many of us, the way we navigate that war is by trying to kill hope, to kill desire, to say to ourselves things like, it's a broken world, I'm not going to get everything I want. Or, until heaven, I'm not going to have all my needs and my wants satisfied. We have lots of phrases that we say to ourselves, but they are all attempts at managing hope. The alternative is to believe and to trust and to acknowledge that the stories of Scripture are God intervening in the precise moment of barrenness and hopelessness that has tarried too long. That happens all the time in the story of Israel. And so, if our identity as a people of faith is rooted in hope and hopelessness, if it's rooted in God doing something new against all the data, Abraham and Sarah were too old to have a child. That's what I mean about against all the data. If that's true in the Bible, what if that is true in your present day-to-day life? What if the world, this is the words of Walter Brueggemann, what if the world is ordered by gifts? And by gifts, he means the inbreaking newness of God that is not an extrapolation of our current circumstances. It's something genuinely new that the Creator creates in our lives. And all of us long for that.
And so you're encouraging us just keep believing in those moments where we're maybe feeling a tug more towards the, I don't want to keep hoping. You're encouraging us to allow belief to keep growing.
But the way that happens is by taking the hopelessness seriously and letting yourself feel the war rather than giving in to what I call in the book Christian cynicism. There's nothing Christian about it, but it's this cynicism that says God is not going to come through for me, and I shouldn't expect him to. Therefore, because he's God and I'm not, therefore I don't have to wrestle with the longings in my heart. I don't have to wrestle with hope. And what I'm inviting the reader to is own your desires, own your war with hope and hopelessness, and feel the fullness of it and engage God about it candidly.
Okay, my last question here. So I am personally acquainted and very familiar with story work. And sometimes, if I'm honest, I feel discouraged because after years of work and many prayers, I wonder how much progress I've actually made.
Mhm.
So I have to ask, is there hope for healing? What does it look like? And what's really possible for us as we do this work?
Yes. It depends how you define healing. A lot of people define healing as something going away. So if I am a quadriplegic, healing is defined as sensation returning to the limbs of my body and I can walk. In other words, my paralysis went away. Or if I struggle with mental health, with anxiety, depression, the depression going away. And I'm not sure that's the best way to think about healing. What if healing is far more about learning how to be with the parts of us that need care? What if healing is more about blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted? What if healing is about experiencing the comfort of God in new ways in my present day-to-day life? In other words, what if healing is more a process than a destination? And it's very clear, Jesus at times healed people of physical ailments. And so the thing that was bad went away. But there were tons of people that he did not heal in that way. What do we do with that? Is healing possible for the rest of us? For those people at the back, at the fringes? Is healing possible in ways that I don't even have an imagination for right now? And if that's the case, what would it look like to bring your heartache to God in a candid way and see how God responds to you?
And what's possible when we do this work?
I think what's possible is that you learn who you truly are. In Revelation 2, there's a white stone that is promised to all of us that overcome. And that white stone has a name written on it. And that name is known only between you and God. That's what the text says. What is written on your white stone? That's what's possible. Learning who you actually are. But you cannot know the name on your white stone if you don't welcome and honor your desires and your disappointments.
Well, Adam, both as a person who has been deeply impacted by your work and on behalf of our listeners, I just want to thank you for going first and for doing the work and inviting us into it.
You are so welcome. Thanks for having me, Sunny.
My prayer is freedom will become your story and redemption your song. Now it's time to take hope-filled action. And if today's episode spoke to you, please don't keep it to yourself. Like, subscribe, and share, and help us grow this community. Thanks for listening to Wild Hope Rising. Until next time, keep stepping boldly into the spacious life you were created for.